He didn't react, and that was what frightened the Marine most. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? The night air hung cool and damp over the quiet petrol station on the edge of a narrow country road somewhere, just outside Leeds. The kind of place where the fluorescent lights hummed faintly and moths circled like restless thoughts, where the scent of petrol and wet asphalt clung low to the ground, and where silence usually meant safety. But tonight, silence carried weight, the kind that pressed gently against the ribs without warning. Oliver Hayes stood beside pump number 3, one hand loosely resting near the pocket of his worn jacket, the other brushing unconsciously against the ink etched into his right forearm. A finely detailed German shepherd, its eyes alert, its posture proud, a memory made permanent. And beside him stood Rex, flesh and bone and quiet vigilance, a real counterpart to the ink, his sable coat catching the pale light, his ears erect but not tense, his amber eyes fixed not on the approaching noise but on something deeper, something unseen, because the sound came first, distant at the horizon of hearing, a low mechanical growl rolling across the open stretch of road like distant thunder, growing steadily louder until it broke into distinct pulses, engines layered one over another. 6, maybe 7 motorcycles cutting through the stillness, their headlights flickering into view like scattered stars descending toward Earth, and Oliver noticed them. Of course he did. Any man with his past would. But he did not stiffen, not yet, because men on bikes were not uncommon even at this hour, and yet there was a rhythm to their approach that felt deliberate, measured, as if each second had been planned before it arrived. And Rex did nothing, no bark, no shift of weight, no warning growl rumbling in his chest, none of the signals Oliver had learned to trust more than his own instincts. And that was the first wrong thing, because Rex always reacted. Always read the world like a map written in scent and motion, always marked danger before it, revealed itself, and now he simply stood there, still as stone, his breath slow, controlled, almost patient, and Oliver's gaze dropped to him, just briefly, searching for the smallest clue, a twitch, a flick of the ear, anything. But Rex did not look back. He did not seek reassurance. He did not question. He simply watched, and that silence from him, that absence of reaction, settled cold in Oliver's chest like a memory he couldn't quite place, the kind that lingered from places he tried not to revisit, places where silence had meant something was already too late to stop. And the bikes rolled in closer now, tires crunching softly over gravel as they pulled into the station forecourt, one by one, engines idling low like restrained voices, their riders dismounting with casual ease, leather jackets catching the light, boots striking the ground with dull certainty, and there was nothing overtly threatening in their movements, nothing that would draw attention in a city or even a busier road. But here, in the quiet edge of nowhere, their presence filled the space too, completely, as though they had brought their own gravity with them. And Oliver straightened slightly, not out of fear but out of awareness, a subtle shift of posture learned long ago, shoulders squared just enough, chin lifted just a fraction, while Rex still did not move. And that was the second wrong thing, because even now, even with strangers stepping closer, even with the faint scent of fuel and leather thickening in the air, he held his ground without tension, his gaze locked somewhere within the group, but not on the group itself, as though he were seeing through them, past them, into something hidden just beneath the surface. And one of the riders gave a polite nod as he passed. Another muttered something indistinct, nothing aggressive, nothing worth answering, and Oliver gave a brief acknowledgement in return, his voice low and even, the kind of tone that neither invites nor rejects. And still Rex remained calm, impossibly calm, and Oliver felt it then, that quiet unease sharpening into something more defined, not fear, not yet, but a question forming where certainty should have been, because Rex was not ignoring them. No, that much was clear now. He was choosing not to react, and that choice, that deliberate restraint, carried meaning far heavier than any bark ever could. And as the engines ticked softly in the cooling night, and the faint buzz of the overhead light filled the spaces between breaths, Oliver realized, with a clarity that settled deep and unshakable, that whatever Rex had sensed, it wasn't coming from the noise, or the group, or the obvious. It was something quieter, something waiting, something that had not yet revealed itself, and the stillness of the dog beside him was not peace. It was focus, the kind that comes before a truth steps into the light. The engine settled into a low, steady hum, like a chorus holding its breath, and for a moment nothing happened, not in any way that would alarm an ordinary passerby. Yet Oliver Hayes had long since stopped trusting what looked ordinary, his gaze drifting across the group with quiet calculation while the faint glow of the station lights cast long, distorted shadows across the forecourt, stretching boots and tires into shapes that seemed to move even when they did not. And still, beside him, Rex remained unmoving, not rigid, not tense, simply anchored, as though the ground beneath his paws held a truth that had not yet surfaced, and Oliver felt it again, that subtle pull of unease tightening behind his ribs, the kind that did not shout but whispered, persistent and patient. One of the riders stepped closer to the shop entrance, pushing the glass door open with a casual nudge, the bell above it giving a tired chime that sounded far too loud in the quiet night, while another leaned against his bike, helmet tucked beneath his arm, his posture relaxed in a way that suggested familiarity rather than threat. And yet there was something about the arrangement of them, the spacing, the angles at which they stood, that felt intentional, not quite wrong, but not entirely right either, and Oliver shifted his weight slightly, boots scraping softly against the concrete, his eyes flicking once more toward Rex, searching for confirmation, for guidance, because in the absence of certainty, the dog had always been his compass, but Rex did not return the glance, did not acknowledge him, his focus held firm, unwavering, fixed somewhere within the group, and then Oliver noticed it, the smallest of details, easy to miss if one was not looking for it. A man standing just off to the side of the others, not apart, but not quite within the loose circle either, his stance a fraction too still, his shoulders held a touch too tight beneath the worn leather jacket. And it was not fear, not exactly, more like restraint, like someone holding themselves together with quiet effort, and Rex's gaze was locked onto him. Not aggressive, not confrontational, simply certain, and Oliver's breath slowed, instinct settling in where thought could not quite reach, because Rex never chose without reason, never fixed his attention without purpose, and if the others were noise, then this man was signal, and yet nothing about him, at first glance, would draw suspicion, his face partially shadowed beneath the dim light, his hands tucked loosely into his pockets, his posture neutral, but the longer Oliver watched, the more the small inconsistencies began to gather, the slight shift of weight from one foot to the other, too measured to be casual, the faint tightening at the jaw as one of the others laughed, as though the sound unsettled him rather than amused. And then there was the scent, faint but distinct, carried on the thin night air, something sharper beneath the usual mix of petrol and damp earth, something that Rex had caught long before any human could, and Oliver felt a quiet certainty began to take shape, not fully formed, not yet understood, but present all the same. And he spoke then, softly, barely more than a breath, easy, not to the men, but to the dog, though Rex did not need the reassurance, because his stillness was not hesitation, it was intention, and the man in question shifted again, just slightly, his hand moving within his jacket for the briefest of moments before returning to stillness. And it was nothing. It could have been nothing, a simple adjustment, a nervous habit, but paired with Rex's unwavering attention, it became something else entirely, something that did not belong in a place meant for passing through, and Oliver's posture changed almost imperceptibly, shoulders aligning, stance grounding, not in preparation for confrontation, but in readiness for truth, whatever shape it might take, and the quiet stretched on, thick and expectant, broken only by the distant sound of a lorry passing somewhere beyond the dark horizon, its low rumble fading into nothing, leaving the small station suspended once more in its fragile stillness. And then Rex moved, not suddenly, not with force, but with purpose, a single step forward, deliberate and measured, placing himself ever so slightly between Oliver and the man he had chosen, his body forming a quiet line, not aggressive, not threatening, simply present. And in that moment, the world seemed to narrow, the edges of it softening as focus drew inward, onto that one point, that one man, that one silent exchange of awareness, and Oliver understood, not fully, but enough to trust, enough to listen. Because sometimes the loudest warnings came not in sound, but in the absence of it. And Rex, in all his stillness, was speaking more clearly than any bark ever could. The distance between them closed not with speed but with awareness, as though the night itself leaned in to listen. And Oliver Hayes felt the shift before he fully understood it, that subtle tightening in the air, the way small sounds seemed to fade, leaving only the faint tick of cooling engines and the soft rasp of Rex's breath, steady and controlled. And the man under Rex's gaze noticed it too, not the dog at first, but the silence. The way conversation around him seemed to lose its ease, laughter thinning into something uncertain, and his shoulders drew in ever so slightly, a reflex too quick to disguise, and Oliver saw it clearly now, not fear of confrontation, but fear of being seen, the kind that does not belong to a man at ease with himself. And Rex took another step, just one, careful and measured, his body still relaxed, his tail low, his ears forward. Everything about him communicating not aggression but intent, and Oliver did not call him back, did not issue a command. Because this was not disobedience. This was communication, and it demanded to be heard, and the man shifted again, his hand brushing against the inside of his jacket in a movement that might have gone unnoticed by anyone else. But here, under the quiet scrutiny of a trained animal and a soldier who had learned to read what others missed, it carried weight. And Oliver spoke, his voice calm, even, carrying just enough to reach without provoking. "You all right there, mate?" The question simple, almost casual, but beneath it lay a steady thread of attention that did not waver, and the man looked up then, meeting Oliver's eyes for the first time, and there was something in that gaze, not hostility, not guilt laid bare, but something unsettled, something searching for a way to remain unseen, and he gave a small nod. "Too quick, too practiced, fine," he said. The word clipped, as though it had been chosen in haste, and Rex did not move closer, did not press further. He simply held his ground, his presence a quiet insistence that something here required acknowledgement, and one of the other riders glanced over, noticing the stillness, the subtle focus narrowing around them, and he frowned slightly, not in anger but in confusion. "Everything all right?" he asked, his tone light, but edged with curiosity, and Oliver gave a small nod without breaking his attention. "Just making sure," he replied, and the moment lingered, suspended between ordinary and something else, something deeper, and then it happened, not with sudden force, but with a quiet unraveling, the man's composure slipping not outwardly, but inwardly, his breathing changing, just slightly, a fraction quicker, his shoulders tightening as though the weight of attention had grown too heavy to carry, and Rex's head tilted a degree to the side, a gesture so small it might have seemed almost gentle, but it held meaning, a recognition, a confirmation, and Oliver stepped forward then, not aggressively, not closing the distance entirely, but enough to shift the balance, enough to say without words that this moment would not pass unnoticed. "You sure you are all right?" he asked again, softer this time, and the man hesitated, his gaze flicking briefly toward the others, as though seeking an anchor, but finding none, and for a second, the night seemed to breathe with him, waiting, and then his hand moved again, slower this time, deliberate, emerging not with anything threatening, but with a small object, something metallic catching the pale light, and Oliver's eyes followed it instinctively, not with alarm, but with focus, because whatever Rex had sensed, it had led here, to this quiet reveal, and the man held the object loosely, almost uncertainly, as though unsure what to do with it now that it had been brought into the open. And it became clear in that moment that this was not what Oliver had expected, not a threat in the way the world often defined it, but something more complicated, something hidden not out of malice, but out of fear, and Rex remained still, his gaze softening just a fraction, as though the truth he had detected had shifted shape now that it stood in the light, and Oliver understood then, not fully, but enough, that the danger here had never been about harm, but about something concealed, something carried in silence, waiting for a moment like this to be seen, and the tension that had filled the air did not snap, did not explode, it simply eased, like a breath finally released after being held too long, and in that quiet release, Oliver placed his hand gently against Rex's neck, feeling the steady warmth beneath his palm, grounding, certain, and the night, which had seemed so heavy only moments before, began to feel still again, not empty, but resolved in a way that did not require explanation, only understanding. For a few seconds no one spoke, not because there was nothing to say, but because something quieter had taken hold of the moment, a kind of understanding that did not need words to settle into place. And the man's hand remained outstretched, the small metallic object resting uncertainly in his palm, catching the dim light in brief, hesitant flashes, and Oliver Hayes did not reach for it, did not step closer, he simply watched. The same way Rex watched, steady and patient, allowing the truth to exist without forcing it into shape, and the others began to notice more clearly now, their earlier ease replaced by a subdued awareness, one of them stepping nearer, his brow furrowed as he glanced between Oliver, the dog, and the man at the center of it all. "What is going on?" he asked, not sharply, but with a tone that suggested the night had shifted beyond simple coincidence, and the man lowered his gaze for a moment, the weight of it all settling across his shoulders, and when he spoke, his voice carried none of the earlier defensiveness, only a quiet strain. "It is nothing dangerous," he said, almost as if he needed to reassure himself as much as the others, and Rex's ears flicked once, not in doubt, but in recognition, as though the tension he had sensed was changing form, losing its edge, and Oliver nodded slightly, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement, because whatever this was, it had never felt like danger in the way people expected danger to feel. It had been something more subtle, something buried beneath behavior and breath, something that required patience to uncover, and the man's grip on the object loosened just enough for it to tilt, revealing its shape more clearly, not a weapon, not anything threatening, but something worn, something carried, something that had meaning far beyond its appearance. And Oliver's expression softened almost imperceptibly, because he had seen that look before, the look of someone holding on to something they did not quite know how to carry in the open, and the night seemed to lean back slightly, the pressure easing as the truth began to settle into place, and one of the riders let out a slow breath, the sound almost inaudible but heavy with relief. "You could have just said," he murmured, though there was no accusation in it. Only a quiet understanding that some things were not easy to say, not even among those you rode beside, and Rex shifted then, not forward, not back, but simply enough to release the invisible line he had drawn, his body relaxing by a fraction, his tail lowering into a more natural curve, and Oliver felt it immediately, that subtle change, the signal that whatever had been unresolved was now beginning to find its place, and he reached down, his hand resting once more against the side of Rex's neck, fingers pressing gently into the thick fur, grounding himself in the steady presence that had guided him through moments far more uncertain than this. And the man finally looked up again, meeting Oliver's eyes without the earlier hesitation, and there was something different there now, not guarded, not withdrawn, but open in a way that felt almost unfamiliar, as though this simple act of being seen had lifted something he had been carrying for longer than he realized. And Oliver gave a small nod, nothing dramatic, nothing that demanded attention, just enough to say that the moment had been understood and did not need to be explained further, and the others began to drift back toward their bikes, not abruptly, but naturally, as though the rhythm of the night was returning, engines still idling softly, the faint scent of petrol mixing once more with the cool, damp air, and the station lights hummed overhead, unchanged, indifferent to the quiet shift that had passed beneath them. And Rex turned his head slightly, his gaze lifting away from the man at last, scanning the space with a calm that spoke of completion, of a task fulfilled without fanfare, and Oliver exhaled slowly, not realizing until then that he had been holding the breath in pieces, waiting for something that never needed to break, and the moment settled into something simple again, something ordinary, yet touched by a quiet grace that lingered just beneath the surface. And as the riders prepared to leave, one of them paused briefly, offering Oliver a small nod of respect, not for anything obvious, not for action or strength, but for something less visible, something recognized only in stillness. And Oliver returned it just as simply, because some exchanges did not need words to carry their meaning. And when the engines finally rose again, cutting through the quiet as the bikes pulled away one by one into the dark stretch of road beyond. The night closed gently behind them, leaving only the soft hum of the station and the steady presence of a man and his dog, standing side by side in the kind of silence that no longer felt heavy, but whole. The quiet that followed did not feel empty. It felt earned, like the kind of stillness that comes after something unseen has shifted into its rightful place. And Oliver Hayes remained where he was for a moment longer, his hand resting lightly against Rex's neck, feeling the slow, steady rhythm beneath the fur, a rhythm that had not faltered even when the air had grown tight with uncertainty. And that steadiness grounded him now more than any explanation could, because whatever had passed between them and those strangers had not needed force, only awareness. And as the distant hum of the departing motorcycles faded into the long stretch of road beyond the dark hedgerows, the petrol station seemed to breathe again, returning to its quiet, familiar pulse, the faint buzz of fluorescent lights, the occasional rustle of wind slipping across the forecourt, the lingering scent of fuel mixing with damp earth, all of it settling back into place as though nothing remarkable had occurred. And yet something had, something subtle but undeniable, and Oliver knew it, not as a thought, but as a feeling that lingered just beneath the surface of his awareness, a quiet certainty that some moments did not need to be loud to matter. And Rex shifted beside him, not in alertness now, but in ease, his body relaxing fully at last, his gaze drifting away from where the man had stood, no longer fixed, no longer searching, as though whatever signal he had been reading had resolved into silence. And Oliver exhaled slowly, his breath visible for a second in the cool night air before fading, and he gave a gentle scratch behind Rex's ear, a simple gesture, familiar and unspoken, and the dog leaned into it just enough to acknowledge, just enough to remind him that beneath all the instinct and training, there was something deeper, something that could not be taught, only trusted. And Oliver stepped back toward his vehicle, the gravel crunching softly underfoot, each step carrying him further from the tension that had briefly held the night in its grip. And as he reached for the door handle, he paused, glancing once more toward the empty stretch where the bikers had disappeared, not with suspicion, not with concern, but with a quiet reflection, because the man at the center of it all had not been dangerous. Not in the way people often feared, but he had been carrying something unseen, something that had pressed against the edges of the moment until it could no longer remain hidden, and Rex had felt it, recognized it, brought it gently into the open without a single sound. And that, Oliver thought, was the kind of awareness that went beyond training, beyond commands and discipline. It was something closer to understanding, something almost compassionate, and the thought settled into him with a weight that was not heavy, but grounding. And he opened the car door slowly, the hinge giving a soft creak that seemed louder in the quiet, and Rex moved with him without needing direction, stepping up beside the vehicle, his movements calm, assured, as though the night had already given him everything it needed to give. And Oliver rested his forearm briefly against the roof, the ink of the German shepherd catching the pale light, a reflection of the living presence at his side. And for a moment the two seemed to mirror each other, one etched in memory, the other breathing beside him, both carrying a meaning that words would never fully hold. And somewhere in the distance, a lorry passed along the motorway, its low rumble barely reaching this quiet corner, a reminder that the world continued on its steady path, indifferent to the small, quiet moments that changed people in ways no one else could see. And Oliver finally climbed into the driver's seat, the familiar interior, surrounding him with its muted scents and worn textures. And Rex settled just beside him, not restless, not alert, simply present, his head angled slightly toward the open window as the cool air drifted in, carrying with it the faint echo of everything that had just passed. And Oliver started the engine, the soft vibration beneath his hands grounding him once more in the present. And as he pulled away from the pump, the station lights receded slowly behind him, their glow fading into the darkness of the road ahead. And for a while, neither man nor dog moved or spoke, because there was nothing left to resolve, nothing left to question, only the quiet understanding that sometimes the world does not reveal its truths through noise or force, but through stillness, through the silent insistence of a loyal soul that refuses to ignore what others overlook. And as the road stretched out before them, lined with hedges and shadow, Oliver found himself glancing once at Rex, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching the corner of his mouth, because he knew, without needing to say it, that whatever came next, he would not face it alone, and in that knowledge, there was a kind of peace that no explanation could ever match. The road stretched ahead in a quiet ribbon of dark tarmac, bordered by hedgerows that whispered softly as the night breeze moved through them, and the steady hum of the engine settled into a rhythm that felt almost meditative, the kind of sound that allowed thoughts to surface without being forced. And Oliver Hayes drove without hurry, his hands resting loosely on the wheel, his gaze steady but softened by reflection, because the moment at the station had not left him, not in a way that demanded answers, but in a way that invited understanding. And beside him Rex remained calm, his posture relaxed yet present, his head angled slightly toward the open window as the cool air brushed against his fur, carrying faint traces of the world they had just left behind, traces that meant little to human senses but everything to him. And yet even now, there was no tension in him, no lingering alertness, only a quiet completeness, as though whatever he had needed to read had already been written and resolved. And Oliver found himself glancing at him briefly, not out of concern, but out of something closer to respect, because there had been a time when he would have questioned that stillness, would have searched for certainty in his own instincts first, but time had taught him otherwise, taught him that there were moments when trust was not a choice but a necessity, and those moments rarely announced themselves, they simply arrived, asking to be recognized, and the headlights cut a steady path through the darkness, illuminating the narrow lane ahead, the white lines gliding past in quiet succession, each one marking the passage of time in a way that felt both measured and endless. And somewhere in the distance, the faint glow of a village appeared, soft and distant, like a promise rather than a destination, and Oliver exhaled slowly, his breath steady now, the earlier tension having settled into something more grounded, something that no longer pressed against him but moved with him. And he spoke then, not loudly, not expecting a response, but out of habit, out of the quiet companionship that had formed over years. "You knew, did you not?" The words simple, almost rhetorical, and Rex's ear flicked slightly in response, a small acknowledgement that needed no translation, and Oliver allowed himself the faintest smile, because there was comfort in that, in the understanding that some connections did not rely on language, only on presence. And the road curved gently to the left, leading them past a line of old stone cottages set back from the lane, their windows dimly lit, curtains drawn against the night, each one holding its own quiet story, its own unseen moments unfolding behind closed doors. And Oliver slowed slightly as he passed, not out of necessity, but out of instinct, a respect for the stillness that belonged to places like this, where life moved at its own pace, unhurried and unnoticed by the wider world. And the memory of the man at the station returned to him then, not sharply, not with urgency, but with a kind of quiet curiosity, because there had been no resolution in the traditional sense, no explanation offered or demanded, only a moment of being seen, and somehow that had been enough to shift whatever tension had been present into something softer, something that no longer needed to hide. And Oliver wondered, briefly, how many moments like that passed unnoticed each day? How many signals went unread simply because no one was listening in the right way? And he glanced at Rex again, his expression thoughtful, because the dog had not acted out of suspicion or fear, he had acted out of recognition, as though he had understood something deeper than behavior, something that lay beneath it. And that thought lingered, settling into Oliver's mind with a quiet weight, and the village lights slipped behind them as the road opened out once more into the darker stretch of countryside, the horizon blending into the sky in a seamless line, and the night air grew cooler, carrying the faint scent of damp grass and distant fields. And Oliver adjusted his grip on the wheel, not tightening it, but grounding it, as though the simple act of driving carried its own kind of reassurance, a forward motion that did not require answers, only presence. And Rex shifted slightly, settling more comfortably against the seat, his breathing slow and even, the rise and fall of his chest a steady rhythm that matched the quiet hum of the engine, and Oliver found a kind of peace in that synchrony, in the unspoken understanding that whatever the world presented next, they would meet it together, not with force, not with haste, but with the same quiet awareness that had carried them through the night so far. And as the road continued to unfold ahead of them, disappearing into the soft darkness beyond the reach of the headlights, Oliver realized that not every moment was meant to be explained. Some were simply meant to be experienced, to be felt, and then carried forward, shaping the way one saw the world without ever needing to define it. And he drove on, the quiet companionship beside him steady and certain, the night stretching out around them in a calm, unbroken silence that no longer felt heavy, but full, as though it held within it all the answers that did not need to be spoken. The further they drove, the quieter the world seemed to become, not in absence, but in depth, as though the countryside held its breath in long, steady intervals, broken only by the soft hum of tires rolling over worn tarmac and the distant call of something unseen across the fields. And Oliver Hayes found that his thoughts no longer circled the moment at the station with tension, but with a kind of calm curiosity, the kind that comes when something has been felt more deeply than it has been understood, and he allowed that feeling to remain without forcing it into meaning, because not everything required resolution. Some things simply asked to be acknowledged, and beside him Rex remained settled, his presence a quiet, constant, his breathing slow, his posture loose. Yet there was still that underlying awareness in him, not alertness in the usual sense, but a readiness that did not fade, as though he carried with him an understanding of the world that did not switch on or off, but simply existed, steady and continuous. And the road dipped gently ahead, leading them into a shallow valley where the air felt cooler, heavier with the scent of damp grass and earth, and the headlights traced the curve with quiet precision, illuminating the edges of low stone walls that had stood for decades, perhaps longer, silent witnesses to countless journeys like this one. And Oliver slowed slightly, not because he needed to, but because something about the night invited it, a kind of unspoken request to move with care, with attention, and he followed it without question, his hands steady on the wheel, his posture relaxed but engaged, and for a while, neither man nor dog moved beyond the rhythm of the drive, the silence between them not empty, but full, layered with everything they had experienced together, everything that had shaped the way they moved through moments like the one that had just passed. And then, without warning, Rex shifted, not abruptly, but with intention, his head lifting slightly, his ears angling forward just enough to signal change, and Oliver felt it immediately, that subtle shift in presence that he had learned never to ignore, and he eased his foot from the accelerator, allowing the car to slow naturally as his gaze moved ahead, scanning the road not for what was obvious, but for what might not yet have revealed itself. And the night offered nothing at first, only the familiar stretch of narrow lane, the hedgerows lining either side, the faint shimmer of moisture on the surface catching the light. And yet Rex did not settle back, did not return to stillness. He remained poised, his attention drawn forward, and Oliver's focus sharpened in response, his mind quieting further, stripping away assumption until only observation remained. And as they rounded the next bend, it became clear, not as a sudden revelation, but as a gradual emergence, a figure standing at the edge of the road, partially obscured by shadow, still and uncertain in a way that did not belong to someone simply passing through. And Oliver eased the vehicle to a near stop, the engine idling softly as the headlights fell fully upon the figure, revealing a man, older perhaps, his posture slightly hunched, his clothing worn but not neglected, and there was something in the way he stood, something hesitant yet deliberate, as though he had been waiting without quite knowing what he was waiting for. And Rex remained focused, not tense, not defensive, simply attentive, and Oliver lowered the window slightly, the cool air slipping into the car as he leaned just enough to be heard without raising his voice. "Evening," he said, the word calm, neutral, offering presence without pressure. And the man looked up slowly, his face lined with the quiet weight of years, his eyes adjusting to the light before settling on Oliver. And for a moment, nothing passed between them but recognition, not of identity, but of situation, of two lives intersecting briefly on a quiet road, and the man gave a small nod, his voice low, almost uncertain. Evening. And Rex's posture softened just a fraction, not withdrawing, but easing, as though whatever he had sensed was not danger, not even the quiet tension of before, but something else entirely, something gentler, something in need of being seen rather than confronted. And Oliver felt it too, that shift from vigilance to awareness, and he remained where he was, not stepping out, not pressing forward, simply present, allowing the moment to unfold in its own time. And the man hesitated before speaking again, his words coming slowly, as though they had not been spoken in a while. "Road gets confusing past here," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the dark stretch ahead, and Oliver nodded, understanding that the statement carried more than simple direction. It carried a kind of quiet admission, a need to connect, however briefly, and he replied with the same measured calm. "It does." And the exchange was simple, almost insignificant on the surface, yet beneath it lay something deeper, something that Rex had recognized before either of them had spoken. And as the moment settled, Oliver realized that this, too, was part of it, not just sensing what was hidden in tension, but recognizing what was present in silence. And he gave a small nod of acknowledgement, a gesture that required nothing further. And as he eased the car forward once more, the man stepped back from the edge of the road, not out of fear, but out of quiet understanding, and Rex lowered his head slightly, his focus easing as the vehicle moved past, and the night closed in gently. Behind them once again, the road stretching forward into darkness that no longer felt uncertain, but simply open, waiting, as it always had been. The car moved on at a measured pace, tires whispering against the narrow road as the figure behind them faded into the soft darkness. And for a few moments neither Oliver Hayes nor Rex shifted, as though both were listening to something that lingered just beyond the reach of sound, something that could not be named but could still be felt, and the night seemed to stretch wider now. The hedgerows thinning slightly as the land opened into gentle fields that rolled away beneath a sky brushed faintly with cloud, the kind of sky that held no urgency, only patience. And Oliver let his shoulders ease further, his grip on the wheel loosening just enough to reflect the quiet that had settled inside him, because what had happened moments before had not demanded action, only presence, and that distinction lingered with him, shaping the way he saw the road ahead, the way he listened to the silence around him. And beside him Rex shifted again, though this time it was not a signal of alertness, but of release, his body settling more deeply into the seat, his head lowering slightly, his breath slow and even, as though whatever thread he had been following through the night had finally reached its end. And Oliver glanced at him briefly, a small, thoughtful look crossing his face, because there was something remarkable in that, in the way the dog moved through the world without hesitation, without doubt, guided by something that did not rely on explanation, and he found himself reflecting not on what Rex had done, but on how he had done it, with calm, with restraint, with a quiet certainty that had never once needed to prove itself. And the road curved gently again, leading them past a cluster of trees whose branches arched overhead like a tunnel, their leaves stirring softly in the breeze, casting shifting patterns of shadow across the windscreen. And Oliver slowed slightly, not out of caution, but out of respect for the narrow passage, the way the darkness gathered more closely here, pressing in without threat, only depth. And as they passed beneath the canopy, the sound of the engine seemed to soften, absorbed by the trees, leaving only the subtle rhythm of movement and breath. And for a moment, it felt as though time itself had slowed, not stopping, but stretching, allowing space for thought without interruption. And Oliver spoke then, quietly, almost to himself. "Not everything needs fixing." The words simple, reflective, and Rex's ear flicked once in response. A small acknowledgement that seemed to affirm the thought, without altering it. And Oliver allowed the silence to return, not filling it further, because there was nothing more to add. And as they emerged from the line of trees, the road opened once more, revealing a distant set of lights that marked the edge of another small village, faint and steady against the horizon, and the sight of it carried a quiet reassurance, not because it offered destination, but because it reminded him that the world continued in its gentle rhythm, each place holding its own moments, its own unseen stories, unfolding quietly beneath the surface. And he wondered, briefly, how many of those moments passed unnoticed, how many people carried things that never reached the light, simply because no one paused long enough to see them. And the thought did not trouble him. It did not weigh heavily. It simply existed, a quiet observation that settled alongside everything else the night had given him. And Rex shifted once more, stretching slightly before resettling, his movements unhurried, his presence unchanged, and Oliver reached out without thinking, his hand brushing lightly along the side of Rex's neck, a familiar gesture that required no response, and yet Rex leaned into it just enough to acknowledge, just enough to remind him that the connection between them was not built on command, but on trust, and the road carried them forward steadily, the distant lights drawing nearer with each passing moment. And as they approached, the subtle signs of life became clearer, the faint glow from windows, the occasional parked car along the roadside, the quiet stillness of a place at rest. And Oliver eased his speed further, not out of necessity, but out of instinct, matching the calm of the surroundings. And as he guided the car through the first stretch of the village, he felt the earlier tension of the night fully dissolve, replaced by something quieter, something more grounded, a sense that whatever had needed to be seen had been seen, whatever had needed to shift had shifted, and nothing more was required of him in this moment. And as the car moved gently along the narrow street, past stone walls and low fences, past homes that held their own quiet warmth behind closed doors, Oliver allowed himself to simply be present, not searching, not anticipating, only moving forward with the steady awareness that had guided him so far. And beside him Rex remained calm, his presence unchanged, his quiet certainty now at rest. And together they continued on through the night, not as men who had solved something, but as those who had witnessed something, something small, something quiet, yet meaningful in a way that would stay with them long after the road had turned and the moment had passed. The village held its quiet like a secret it had learned to keep well, the narrow lane threading between stone cottages whose windows glowed faintly behind drawn curtains, and Oliver Hayes guided the car through at a gentle pace, tires rolling softly over uneven patches of road that spoke of years rather than wear. And there was something about places like this that slowed a man without asking, something in the stillness that reminded him that not every moment needed urgency. And beside him Rex remained calm, his presence steady, his gaze drifting not with alertness now, but with quiet observation, taking in the shifting light, the passing shapes, the subtle movement of shadows that stretched and folded with the car's progress. And Oliver found himself easing further into that rhythm, his thoughts no longer circling the earlier encounters as questions, but settling into them as understanding, because what the night had shown him had not been about solving anything. It had been about seeing, about recognizing what existed beneath the surface of ordinary moments. And he allowed that to sit with him, unforced, as the road curved gently past a small green where an old lamppost cast a pale circle of light onto damp grass, the kind of place that might hold quiet conversations during the day and silent reflections by night. And as they passed it, Rex's head lifted slightly, not sharply, not with urgency, but with a subtle awareness that Oliver had learned to notice without hesitation, and he slowed again, not abruptly, but with a measured ease, his eyes scanning the edges of the light where shadow met illumination, because that was often where the truth of a moment revealed itself, not in what was clearly seen, but in what lingered just beyond it. And there, at the far side of the green, stood a small figure, barely more than a silhouette at first, still and uncertain in a way that did not belong to someone merely passing through. And as the headlights shifted to catch it more fully, it resolved into a young person, perhaps no more than a teenager, standing alone with hands tucked into the sleeves of an oversized coat, their posture drawn inward as though the night itself felt too large. And Oliver eased the car to a stop at a respectful distance, not closing the space too quickly, allowing the moment to unfold without pressure. And Rex remained seated, his body relaxed yet attentive, his gaze soft but focused, not searching for threat, but recognizing presence. And Oliver lowered the window slightly, the cool air carrying a faint scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke into the car, and he spoke with the same calm neutrality he had carried throughout the night. "You all right there?" His voice steady, neither intrusive nor distant, simply offering acknowledgement, and the figure shifted slightly, the movement hesitant, but not fearful. And when they looked up, the light revealed a face marked not by distress in the obvious sense, but by something quieter, something held in, the kind of expression that spoke of thoughts not yet spoken. And there was a pause, a small space where words might have formed but did not quite settle, and Rex's ears flicked once, his posture easing just enough to signal that what he sensed here was not danger, not even tension in the way it had been before, but something softer, something uncertain yet safe. And Oliver did not press further, did not step out or move closer. He simply remained where he was, present, allowing the silence to carry its own meaning. And after a moment, the young person gave a small nod, their voice quiet, almost lost to the night. "I am fine." And the words were simple, but Oliver heard the space around them, the things not said, and he gave a small nod in return, not questioning, not doubting, simply acknowledging, because sometimes that was enough. Sometimes being seen without being pressed was the only thing needed to shift a moment, and Rex lowered his head slightly, his attention easing as the quiet settled, and Oliver allowed a brief pause to remain before speaking again, softer now. "Road can feel longer at night." And the young person glanced down the lane, then back again, and though they did not reply, something in their posture shifted, not outwardly dramatic, but enough to suggest that the moment had been felt. And Oliver gave one last nod, not lingering, not overstaying the space. And as he raised the window and eased the car forward once more, the small figure remained where they were, but no longer as withdrawn as before, and the lampost's pale light seemed less stark, less isolating, as though the simple exchange had altered its weight. And Rex settled back into stillness beside him, his breathing slow and even, and Oliver drove on, the village continuing around them in quiet continuity. And he understood then, not in words but in feeling, that the night had not been about singular events, but about a thread that connected them, a quiet awareness that moved from one moment to the next, revealing not danger, not drama, but something more enduring, the simple, often overlooked truth that presence, when offered without demand, could be enough to change the shape of a moment. And as the road carried them onward, deeper into the calm of the sleeping village, Oliver did not search for what might come next. He simply remained open to it, trusting that whatever needed to be seen would reveal itself in its own time, just as it had all along. The village thinned gradually behind them, the last of the cottages giving way to open road once more, and with it came a deeper quiet, the kind that settled not just around them but within, as though the night itself had drawn a line beneath everything that had passed and invited them to step beyond it without carrying weight. And Oliver Hayes let the car move at its own steady pace, neither slow nor fast, simply aligned with the rhythm of the road as it stretched ahead through the dark of the engine. And Oliver slowed slightly as they crossed, not out of caution, but out of instinct, as though the place itself invited a quieter passing. And Rex lifted his head just enough to take in the shift in scent, the cool damp air rising from the water below, and then settled again, his awareness steady but no longer searching. And as they moved beyond the bridge, the road opened into a wider stretch bordered by fields that rolled gently into the distance, their outlines barely visible beneath the muted glow of the sky. And in that openness, Oliver felt something within him ease further, the last traces of earlier tension dissolving into a calm that did not demand explanation. And he spoke then, softly, more to the space than to the dog beside him. "You do not chase it, do you?" The words carrying a quiet reflection, and Rex's ear flicked once in response, the smallest of acknowledgments, as though confirming what Oliver had come to understand, that not everything required pursuit. Some things revealed themselves only when left undisturbed. And Oliver allowed a faint smile to settle at the corner of his mouth, because there was a kind of freedom in that understanding, a release from the need to control or define every moment. And the road stretched on, uninterrupted, the steady rhythm of driving becoming almost meditative, each passing second marked not by urgency, but by continuity. And the countryside around them remained still, fields resting under the quiet watch of the night, distant trees forming dark silhouettes against the horizon. and the occasional farmhouse light glowing faintly in the distance, a reminder of life continuing quietly beyond the narrow beam of their headlights. And Oliver adjusted his grip on the wheel slightly, not tightening, but grounding, his posture relaxed yet attentive, because awareness, he realized, did not fade when calm arrived. It simply changed shape, becoming less about searching for what was wrong and more about recognizing what was present. And Rex shifted slightly, stretching one paw before settling again, his breathing slow and even, a steady rhythm that seemed to mirror the flow of the road itself. And Oliver glanced at him briefly, not with question, but with quiet appreciation, because there was something deeply reassuring in that presence, something that reminded him that he did not have to carry every moment alone, that sometimes the clearest understanding came not from within, but from simply trusting what stood beside you. And as the miles passed beneath them, the road began to incline gently, leading them toward a higher stretch of land where the view opened wider, the horizon stretching further into the distance. And Oliver eased the car slightly as they reached the crest, allowing the headlights to sweep across the landscape below, revealing the faint outline of another road winding its way through the fields. And for a moment, he paused there, not stopping completely, but slowing just enough to take it in, the quiet expanse, the stillness that held no tension, only space. And he realized then that the night had not been about what had been encountered, but about how it had been met, not with force, not with fear, but with a steady, quiet presence that allowed each moment to unfold without resistance. And that understanding settled into him fully now, not as a thought to be revisited, but as something lived, something carried forward without effort. And as he guided the car down the gentle slope beyond, returning once more to the steady rhythm of the road, he no longer looked ahead with expectation, only with openness, because whatever the night held beyond this point, it would reveal itself in its own time, just as everything else had. And beside him Rex remained still, calm, and certain, his quiet presence a reminder that sometimes the most important things are not the ones that make themselves known, but the ones that are simply there, waiting to be seen. The road descended gently from the rise, the wide view behind them folding back into narrower lines of hedgerow and shadow. And with each meter the sense of openness gave way to something more enclosed, more intimate, as though the night itself was guiding them inward, not just across distance, but into a quieter understanding that had been building since the first moment Rex chose stillness over reaction. And Oliver Hayes felt it now more clearly than before, not as a thought he needed to hold on to, but as something that had already settled into him, shaping the way his eyes moved across the road, the way his breath aligned with the steady hum of the engine, the way he no longer searched for what might be wrong, but remained open to what simply was. And beside him Rex remained unchanged in the way that mattered most, calm, grounded, present, his amber eyes reflecting the passing light. Without chasing it, his posture neither alert nor withdrawn, but balanced in that quiet space between. And Oliver glanced at him briefly, not out of habit this time, but out of recognition, because the dog had not only guided him through the night, he had altered the way he moved within it. And that realization carried a weight that was not heavy, only steady, like something finally understood after being felt for far too long without name. And the car rolled onward, tires brushing over a patch of worn gravel before returning to smooth tarmac, the slight change in texture echoing softly through the vehicle. And beyond the narrow road, the fields stretched unseen in the darkness, their presence marked only by the faint scent of soil and grass that drifted through the open window. And Oliver allowed his shoulders to relax fully now, not in the way of someone letting go, but in the way of someone no longer needing to hold anything in place. And he spoke again, quietly, the words forming, not as a question, but as a statement shaped by the night itself. You do not force it. And Rex's ear flicked once more, the smallest movement, yet enough to affirm what needed no confirmation. And Oliver let the silence follow, not filling it, not breaking it, because it had become something valuable in its own right, something that carried meaning without needing sound. And as they approached a crossroads marked by an old signpost leaning slightly with age, he slowed instinctively, the headlights catching the weathered wood and the faded lettering that pointed in quiet directions to places that held their own unseen stories. And for a moment, he paused there, not because he needed to choose a direction, but because something about the place invited stillness, the kind that allowed a man to feel where he was rather than simply pass through it. And Rex remained calm, his presence unchanged, yet attentive in that subtle way that had guided them all night. And Oliver rested his hand briefly against the steering wheel, feeling the faint vibration of the idling engine beneath his palm, grounding him in the present. And he realized then that the night had not been a sequence of separate moments, but a single thread, one that had moved through people, through places, through silence and presence alike, revealing itself not through action but through awareness. And that thread did not end here. It simply continued, stretching beyond what he could see, beyond what he needed to understand. And with that, he eased the car forward again, choosing the road that curved gently to the left, not out of decision but out of quiet certainty. And the headlights swept across the path ahead, revealing a narrower lane lined with tall hedges that leaned inward as though sharing a secret, their leaves brushing softly in the night breeze. And as they drove on, the world seemed to settle even further, the earlier encounters now part of something larger, something that no longer stood apart, but belonged within the flow of the journey. And Oliver felt a quiet gratitude rise within him, not for any specific moment, but for the way the night had unfolded, for the way it had asked nothing, yet offered understanding in return. And Rex shifted slightly, adjusting his position before settling once more, his breathing steady, his presence constant. And Oliver reached out once more, his hand resting lightly against the side of the dog's neck, the gesture simple, familiar, yet carrying more meaning now than it had before, because it was no longer just reassurance, it was recognition, an acknowledgement of something shared, something that had guided them both without words. And as the road carried them deeper into the quiet countryside, the darkness no longer felt uncertain or unknown. It felt open, expansive in a way that invited rather than concealed. And Oliver drove on without haste, without expectation, his focus steady but unforced, because he knew now that whatever the road held ahead, it would not need to be chased or uncovered. It would reveal itself in its own time, just as everything else had. And in that understanding, there was a kind of peace that settled not just around him, but within him, quiet, steady, and complete. The narrow lane seemed to draw them deeper into a quieter world, the hedges rising taller on either side, as though closing out everything beyond the present moment. And Oliver Hayes allowed the car to move at a slow, steady pace, not out of caution, but out of alignment with the stillness that had settled so completely around him, the headlights tracing a soft path ahead, illuminating the gentle curve of the road and the occasional glint of dew resting along the leaves. And beside him Rex remained composed, his presence unchanged, his breathing even, his posture relaxed yet quietly aware in a way that no longer signaled alertness, but rather a deep and constant connection to everything around him. And Oliver felt it again, that quiet recognition rising within him, the understanding that the night had not been about events or encounters, but about something far more subtle, something that revealed itself only when a man stopped trying to define it. And as they continued along the lane, the sound of the engine softened further, absorbed by the thick hedgerows and the damp air, until it became little more than a low, steady vibration beneath them. And for a moment it felt as though they were moving not through space, but through something deeper, something that existed between moments rather than within them. And Oliver rested one hand lightly against the wheel, the other briefly brushing the familiar ink on his right forearm, the outline of the dog there catching the faint glow from the dashboard. And he glanced toward Rex, the real presence beside him grounding the memory in something immediate, something living, and the connection between them felt clearer now than it ever had, not because it had changed, but because he had finally learned how to see it. And the road dipped slightly before rising again, leading them toward a small clearing where the hedges fell back just enough to reveal an open stretch of land. And Oliver eased the car forward into that space, allowing the headlights to sweep across the grass, catching the soft movement of wind as it passed through. And he slowed almost to a stop, not out of necessity, but out of instinct, because something about the openness invited stillness, invited pause. And Rex lifted his head slightly, not in alertness, but in quiet attention, his gaze moving across The clearing as though taking in something that did not need to be named, and Oliver followed that gaze, not searching, not expecting, simply observing. And for a moment, nothing revealed itself, no figure, no movement beyond the natural sway of the grass. And yet the pause remained, held in place by something deeper than sight. And Oliver realized then that this was the final piece of it, not a moment of discovery, not a revelation waiting to be uncovered, but the absence of both, the understanding that sometimes there was nothing hidden, nothing unresolved, only the quiet space where everything simply was. And that realization settled into him with a calm certainty that did not need to be questioned, and he exhaled slowly, the breath leaving him without weight, without tension, and Rex lowered his head again, his posture easing fully as though confirming what Oliver had come to understand, that the night had completed its quiet work, not through action, not through explanation, but through presence alone. And Oliver allowed the car to remain still for a few seconds longer, the engine idling softly beneath him, the world around them unchanged yet somehow different in the way it was now perceived. And he spoke once more, not loudly, not with expectation, but with the quiet clarity that had formed within him. It was never about what we find, and the words lingered in the air, not needing response, not seeking confirmation, because their meaning was already complete. And after a moment, he shifted the car gently back into motion, the tires rolling forward with a soft crunch over the edge of gravel before returning to smooth road, and the lane carried them onward once more, the hedges rising again to frame their path, the night settling back into its steady rhythm. And Oliver no longer looked ahead with anticipation or behind with reflection. He simply moved forward, present in the moment as it unfolded, trusting that whatever needed to be seen would be, and whatever did not would remain where it belonged. And beside him Rex remained calm, his quiet presence unchanged, a steady reminder that sometimes the deepest truths are not revealed through noise or action, but through the simple act of being there, fully, without resistance, without demand. And as the road stretched on into the darkness, Oliver felt no need to question where it led, because for the first time in a long while, he understood that the journey itself had already given him everything he needed to carry forward. The lane carried them onward with a quiet certainty, the hedgerows parting slowly as the land opened once more into a gentle rise, and beyond it, far in the distance, the faint suggestion of morning began to gather, not yet light, not yet day, but a soft easing of the darkness that hinted at what was coming. And Oliver Hayes noticed it not with surprise, but with a calm acceptance, as though the night had always been moving toward this point, this quiet transition where everything softened, without needing to change all at once. And he eased his foot slightly on the accelerator, allowing the car to climb the rise at an unhurried pace, the engine humming steadily beneath him, the sound familiar now in a way that no longer filled the silence, but simply accompanied it. And beside him Rex remained still, his posture relaxed, his breathing slow, his presence as constant as it had been since the first moment of the night. And Oliver glanced at him once more, not searching, not questioning, but simply acknowledging, because there was nothing left to understand, nothing left to resolve, only the quiet recognition of what had already been given. And as they reached the top of the rise, the view opened before them, the field stretching out in muted tones, the sky above shifting ever so slightly from deep shadow to a softer gray, and in that space, the world felt neither asleep nor awake, but suspended between, holding both what had been and what was yet to come. And Oliver slowed the car just enough to take it in, not stopping, not pausing completely, but allowing the moment to exist fully as it passed. And he felt it then, clearly, the final piece settling into place, not as a revelation, not as something new, but as something that had been present all along, quietly waiting to be recognized. And he spoke, his voice low, steady, carrying the weight of understanding without the need to explain it. Some things are not meant to be chased. And the words lingered in the space between them, not needing response, not seeking affirmation, because their truth was already complete. And Rex's ear flicked once, a small, almost imperceptible movement, yet enough to acknowledge what did not need to be said again. And Oliver allowed a faint smile to form, not from relief, not from satisfaction, but from a quiet peace that had taken its time to arrive. And as the car began its gentle descent on the other side of the rise, the first thin line of pale light touched the horizon, barely visible, yet unmistakable, and with it came a subtle shift in the air, a freshness that replaced the cool stillness of the night, and Oliver felt his shoulders ease fully now, the last remnants of tension dissolving without effort, because there was nothing left to hold on to, nothing left to anticipate, only the steady movement forward into whatever came next, and Rex shifted slightly, stretching before settling again, his presence unchanged, his calm as steady as the road beneath them, and Oliver rested his hand briefly against the side of the dog's neck, the gesture simple, familiar, yet carrying the weight of everything the night had revealed, and for a moment, they remained like that, connected not by command or expectation, but by a shared understanding that had grown quietly, moment by moment, without force, without demand, and as the road continued to unfold ahead of them, leading them out of the last shadows of night and toward the gentle promise of morning, Oliver no longer looked for signs, no longer searched for meaning, because he had come to understand that meaning was not something to be found. It was something to be allowed, something that revealed itself only when a man was willing to stand still within it, to listen without needing to hear, to see without needing to define, and in that understanding, there was a kind of grace, quiet and steady, that did not fade with the passing of the moment, but remained, carried forward into whatever came next. And as the first hint of light spread slowly across the sky, softening the edges of the world, Oliver drove on, not as a man who had reached an end, but as one who had learned how to move within the journey itself, and beside him Rex remained calm,